Welcome everyone to Immigration 301, Office Hours with Jeff and Danielle, your advanced level guide to navigating the world of immigration. I'm Danielle Goldman, entrepreneur, immigration advocate, and guide for innovative work visa solutions.
And I'm Jeff Goldman, immigration attorney with over 30 years of experience helping individuals and companies achieve their immigration goals.
Together, we're taking your questions, tackling your challenges, and delivering the insights you need to move forward with confidence on your path. So let's dive in. This week, Jeff, is H-1B lottery season kickoff. So we are going to be talking about what is happening at Jeff's firm. We will be diving into the do's and don'ts of H-1Bs, and we will be answering viewer-submitted questions about government crackdowns. So stick around.
Yeah, that's right, Danielle. H-1B lottery has opened and it's now okay to file. And the lottery registration season is going to end on March 24th at noon Eastern Time. That'll be the last minute where one can submit a lottery registration. So it's incredibly busy.
Yeah, I wanted to hear a little bit more about what's happening at your office right now. My question for you is this the Christmas of your law firm? Is this the Christmas season, or is this like tax season for accountants?
It is so far away from Christmas, I can't even tell you. I think it's similar to a tax season. It is nonstop all day. If I agreed to take calls up till midnight every night, I think clients would fill every spot that I open because there's so many questions and hundreds of people who are filing on their own have questions. And it's open season. Let's ask Jeff at 8 p.m. at night.
Can
What,
Jeff
what
file your own H-1B?
you can file your own H-1B. The instructions on the USCIS website are very clear, and I think any person and company can file their own, and in almost every case, you're going to do it right. That said, hundreds of companies have hired my law firm to file their H-1B registration for the lottery, mostly because either they don't trust themselves or it's just easier and they don't want to deal with it. They don't have the time to start reading the directions. They want to be sure it's done right and on time. But it is true that registering for the H-1B lottery is one of those areas in the world of immigration that is pretty straightforward and can be done without a lawyer.
So the registration can really be done without an attorney, but when it comes to the petition, I'm sure that's not the same advice.
Absolutely not. If you win the H-1B lottery, and then your company can file an H-1B petition prior to June 30th, that absolutely has to be done by an experienced immigration lawyer. It's so complex that not possible to do it correctly if you're doing it on your own.
One of the things that you and I have talked about over the years is how during times of uncertainty or times where we thought the economy was a disaster, you actually never have seen a slowdown in immigration in your work experience. And there's a lot of questions right now about, with the uncertainty of the Trump administration, with the uncertainty of the economy and inflation, I'm so curious what your take is and what you're personally experiencing for volume. Does uncertainty increase immigration needs from lawyers in general? And will it change the lottery this year in 2025? And this is fiscal year 2026.
Well, Danielle, I certainly can tell you that in Trump 1.0, our law firm increased our work every single year, mostly because the chaos he creates adds so much confusion and so many questions that companies and individuals are reaching out to a lawyer. They just can't cut through all of the red tape and the confusion by themselves. And it's probably a good idea because we're doing it every day, all day. And we are on top of the sudden changes and really on top of the hacks that work. So that's where I think a really good lawyer comes into place. I think with this year's lottery, people can expect it's going to go smoothly. There's been no sudden changes in the rules, no sudden word from the White House that H-1Bs will be only for jobs that pay $200,000 or more, which is what he tried to do the last time he was president.
You
And I
mean the
think,
merit-based lottery system?
correct. Correct. No merit-based lottery system. We still have the same situation. There's 65,000 H-1Bs available with an additional 20,000 only for those who have at least a master's degree from a U.S. university. Which reminds me of a quick question that has come up numerous times over the past 3 weeks.
Let's hear it.
Can an employer enter a registration in the H-1B lottery using the master's cap, the extra 20,000 for people with a master's degree, if the job only requires a bachelor's degree? And the answer is yes. And a similar question, can you check off the master's degree if the field in which the job will be connected to is really related to the bachelor's degree, but the person does have a master's degree from a U.S. university? Can you still check off the box on the lottery registration saying you want to be in the master's cap? And the answer is yes. So I hope employers who are doing this on their own without an attorney recognize to check off the master's cap. And actually, one more strategy, you don't have to have the master's degree right now, this week, while you're entering the lottery. You just have to have the master's degree before June 30th, which is the deadline to file the H-1B petition. And since many people are graduating in May or early June with their master's degree, they absolutely can be entering the master's cap right now.
That's so interesting. I don't think people know that. Another scenario that came up with us last year was, and this was a disaster, and people should learn from it. We heard of two individuals separately who had entered the H-1B lottery, checked that master's cap, but their school was a private institution and didn't qualify as an institution that counted towards that additional 20,000. Do you know anything about that? I mean, it was they ultimately ended up having their H-1Bs rejected because of this.
Yeah, the H-1B program says that you have to have at least the equivalent of a bachelor's degree from a university that qualifies under the federal regulation for higher for schools of higher education, which includes all nonprofit universities or public universities. It cannot be a private for-profit university. If that's where the only degree is from, you're simply not eligible to enter the H-1B lottery.
Wow. What are these private universities? Are we just not aware of them? Do you know any examples? We might have to look this up and send it out to folks after.
Well, I can tell you one very famous for-profit university. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Trump University. And Donald Trump decided many years back to start his own for-profit university. Of course, it was a scam. It was just to make money, and it was closed quickly by the federal regulators. But that would be an example of a for-profit private
Sorry.
university.
Noting to anyone who's listening that if you are trying to get an H-1B and went to Trump University, you're not going to be eligible. That's interesting. So that's really helpful information about the type of university or institution that you have to have that degree from. So just pulse check that as you're entering into the lottery. We talked last week about the founders from Harvard Business School who you spoke to about the upcoming H-1B lottery. And I know this week you had tons of follow-up conversations with these founders about their prospects of getting the H-1B and preparing for this. Do you have, what was the most common question you heard this week? Was there any theme in the debrief that you want to share with everyone about founders what they should be thinking about as they enter the lottery season?
Well, the first takeaway is a founder who owns 100% of a US company and wants to enter himself or herself in the H-1B lottery this year, the founder can be the contact person for the company. And the founder can have their own name as the employer and as the employee who's being sponsored for the H-1B lottery. It looks weird, but with the new ruling from the U.S. Immigration Service that it is absolutely okay for founders to have H-1B status with their own startup, which was very exciting news. It just solidifies what we've always suspected, that a founder can sign his own H-1B lottery registration and an H-1B petition. The other interesting takeaway that we've seen a lot of discussion on this week is it is relatively easy for an entrepreneur or a founder to have their own company sponsor them for H-1B and register for the H-1B lottery. But there are considerations that have to be thought about right now. For instance, what happens if you win the H-1B lottery? You have to file a petition no later than June 30th, and with that petition must be evidence that the company has enough specialty occupation work for the foreign national to do. And for a startup, you might not have really any work yet. So that's a consideration. Will you be able to prove there's enough specialty occupation work for the H-1B beneficiary to do? The other regards the requirement that the company pay the fair prevailing wage. I mentioned last week that one strategy, if the company is just starting out and doesn't have a lot of money, you could offer the foreign national a part-time H-1B, and then suddenly the fair prevailing wage becomes just half of that amount, which makes it more palatable for the company. But you still need something to prove that the company will be able to pay that wage.
Jeff, can I pause you there for 1 second? So
Yes.
you're saying that it's possible for founders to actually sponsor themselves, put themselves as the employer on a petition, sponsor themselves, and even potentially if they're a newer company and they don't have a lot of funds in the bank, they could sponsor themselves for 10 hours per week, 20 hours per week. What's the threshold for part-time? And I assume you have to demonstrate the funds in your bank account, right? We always have to prove that the fair wage can be paid. So what does that evidence look like?
Well, it is true that an H-1B can be sponsored for part-time. The amount of the part-time has to make sense for the job you're doing.
Mhm.
My law firm files many H-1Bs a year for part-time work as little as 5 hours a week. And we've been successful, but those jobs clearly are 5 hour a week jobs. Now, if you're a founder and you're going to be running a company, that's not a 5 hour a week job, but it could be a 20 hour a week job. And we have filed H-1Bs for founders for 20 hours a week. They've all been approved. Here's what we show for the company's ability to pay the fair wage. There's no set rules on this. What we know is that it has to be enough evidence to give a comfort level to the immigration officer that the fair wage will be able to be paid. So it could be a combination of some money in the bank, maybe one or two contracts for business that will be kicking in and money will be coming in that helps an immigration officer feel comfortable that the fair wage will be paid. Or maybe there's a letter of intent from an investor or a letter of intent from a customer that says, if this H-1B is approved, we're in. We're going to invest in the company, or we're going to sign a contract with the company for X amount of money a year. All of these kinds of documented evidence helps prove that the company can pay the fair wage.
That's huge. I mean, a lot of these companies are just starting out, and the fact that they could have a letter from an investor that says they're going to, get this infusion of capital, or a contract for future work from a customer that hasn't been delivered yet, because obviously these companies are just getting off the ground. That's pretty important for founders to understand. One of the scenarios that comes up all the time, I want to paint a picture of and see what your thoughts are for what this person's trajectory would be. We have a lot of individuals who are at Google, at Microsoft, working full time, but have started companies on the side. If someone is in a scenario where their main employer is filing an H-1B for them, but they want to have another company, say their own startup, sponsor their H-1B instead, what should they be considering?
Great question. Absolutely, you would hope that the full-time employer, the Google or the Microsoft, is going to enter their valued employee into the H-1B lottery. Now, it is possible for 2 employers, 3 employers, even 20 employers to enter the same foreign national into the H-1B lottery. But as of last year, they've changed the rules so that it no longer is actually an advantage. It's not the more lottery entries, the more chance you have. That's not true, because starting last year, they conduct the lottery based on your passport number. And you might have 20 employers entering you in the H-1B lottery, but you only have one passport number, and so you only have one entry into the H-1B lottery. Now, here's the rule if you win the lottery. Any company who entered the lottery can be the company that files the H-1B petition no later than June 30th. So even if Company A is informed that your registration won the H-1B lottery, that's great news, but it could be Company B that files the H-1B petition in June, as long as Company B also had entered the lottery. And of course, then the question is, well, what happens if the foreign national actually wants to work for Company B, but they didn't enter the lottery? Such a common question and important. Company A must file the H-1B petition if they were the only one that entered the H-1B lottery. And if that petition is approved, and it's after October 1st, which is the first day of the next fiscal year and the day the H-1B takes effect, then any company can immediately file their own H-1B without winning the lottery. And that's how the foreign national can work for Company B. Certainly every year we have clients who call us in August and say, hey, I won the H-1B lottery and my employer already filed the H-1B petition with their own immigration lawyer and it was approved, but I'm not going to work for that company. I just got an offer from Company B. Can you file a new H-1B so I can work for Company B? And the answer is yes, we can, but we don't want that petition to arrive at the Immigration Service before October 1st. And here's why. Should Company A find out that the foreign national is playing this game and that there's another company who has filed an H-1B, Company A can withdraw their H-1B. And if this is before October 1st, the end result is as if you never won the lottery. You're out. So that would be awful. So that's why people should wait till after October 1st to breathe a word to anybody that there's going to be another company filing an H-1B. So I want to hop back in to talk about the reality of the H-1B lottery. What are you anticipating for a selection rate this year? If you're part of the master's cap, I think you might have a 27 to 28 to 30% chance of winning the lottery. And if you're not part of the master's cap, it might be roughly 20% chance of winning. Um, to be a little more specific, last year, my law firm had a 18% success rate in the initial lottery, and I was told by many of my peers that that was high. But of course, they then conducted a second lottery, and we had so many winners in the second lottery that we ended up having an overall success rate of close to 25%. And I think I was hearing that to be true from a lot of people. And I think it roughly broke out to be over 25 to 30% for master's cap cases and maybe 20% averaging for the regular cap.
Yeah, at Build, we had a 20% selection rate, and we heard from our partners, our attorney partners across the country, that they were about 25%, so totally in line with your firm. So that means you're expecting a similar amount of registrants as to last year, which is pretty interesting, in line with what we talked about earlier. But really interesting that companies, despite a new administration, still, you believe, have this need to sponsor talent. I suppose, in my opinion, this is just a reflection of the talent pool today, and companies feel like they don't really have a choice. Is that in line with what you think?
It is, and companies are scared uh, of what might happen under the Trump administration. I have two different clients who said the same thing. In the past several years, they did not enter the lottery for employees who were going to start with them the, in the summer after graduation, so the following summer. Although they already knew the employee, they had met them, they hired them, and they couldn't wait for them to start. They felt like that employee was still going to have 3 years of OPT and STEM OPT, three lotteries, and that should be enough. Why would the company go through the time and trouble of entering the lottery for someone they hardly know, other than making them an offer? This year's different. At least two of my companies sent us a total of about 9 more H-1B lottery registrations for people who haven't even started working for them yet.
Yeah, that's wild. I also saw a stat this week that said 40 to 60% of the future AI workforce is non-US citizens. And that means that what they're saying is 40 to 60% of AI related master's degree students in the last 5 years who have graduated were all non-US citizens. Obviously, this is just in AI, but we're talking about these high demand fields. I mean, it's very wild. It's reflective of our education system, which is why we are in this position where companies have this high demand for talent. So I'm not surprised either that these, I mean, we see it every day, companies coming to us looking for solutions, who, have these individuals who they absolutely need and don't believe that they don't have people lined up at the door for these niche positions. And that's really who, um, the companies who are desperate to retain their talent.
It's absolutely true, Danielle. And as you know, not only do they have these talented foreign students working for them in OPT, but they regularly meet talented foreigners from outside the US who are not even here, who they would love to have come work on H-1B. And so the lottery isn't even an option for them at that moment. And that makes things even harder for these companies.
Right. To note, you can enter the lottery from outside the United States, so it's an option to enter, but it's, of course, a risk and a challenge. But you've known about this challenge for a long, long time. And I was thinking about our chat today and thinking about what we were going to talk about regarding H-1Bs, and I realized that a lot of people who might be listening don't know about your history with trying to solve the H-1B problem. So I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the solution that you ideated back in 2014, how that happened. I mean, it's such an interesting story. What prompted you to start thinking about cap-exempt H-1Bs?
Well, for years, um, and I've been an immigration lawyer now for 31 years, and almost from the very start, There was an endless conversation with clients. What do you do when you need a talented foreign national who's perfect for H-1B, but there are no H-1Bs? And one of the solutions I used to talk about all the time was a cap-exempt H-1B, because the law provides that there are certain employers who are exempt from the annual lottery. These employers can always file an H-1B any time of the year, and they're called H-1B cap-exempt employers, meaning they're not subject to the 85,000 cap of H-1Bs. The four organizations that are cap-exempt employers are universities, nonprofit organizations, nonprofit research organizations, and government research organizations. And I would tell clients, listen, maybe you have a connection to one of those four cap-exempt organizations. And if you do, maybe they would hire your software engineer for part-time work and get an approved H-1B through the cap-exempt H-1B petition. And as soon as that's approved, your company can immediately hire the same foreign national on what's called a concurrent H-1B without winning the lottery. And my clients will say, that's unbelievable. I didn't know that. Can you find me a university or a nonprofit affiliated with the university who would hire this guy part-time? And I would say, that's not my job. I don't know. I can't do that part of it. This conversation was almost 2 or 3 times a week, all year round, year after year. And one day, I started thinking about this, thinking, well, maybe I can do something about it. Maybe I can start my own nonprofit research organization or a nonprofit affiliated with a university. And I started putting pen to paper and thinking, what would this look like? How could I start a nonprofit research organization? What would we be researching? How would we publish the research? How would I pay the researchers? And then it led into me thinking more about the nonprofit affiliated with the university. I wasn't sure how to start my own university, but I kept thinking, what if I started my own? Anyway, this conversation was in my head for a couple of years with me keep putting pad to paper. What if I could find a university to partner with? How would this all play out? In about 2014, I was chatting with a friend of mine, Jeff Busgang, who's the founder of Flybridge Capital and a well-known venture capitalist in Boston. We were chatting about this, and he started getting really excited about this idea that if we had a university who would agree to always file the part-time H-1B through a cap-exempt petition, how that could help tech companies who then could file a concurrent H-1B for the same foreign national. And he and I sat in a coffee shop for about 6 hours, and we just brainstormed a white paper of what this would look like. And after we refined it, we developed what came to be known as the Massachusetts Global Entrepreneur in Residence Program. And Jeff Busgang, through his connections, was able to get government excited about it, venture capitalists excited about it, and tech companies excited about it. And we were off and running, and we tried our first one. We got the University of Massachusetts at Boston to say they would file a 5-hour cap-exempt H-1B petition for an entrepreneur, and they did, and it was approved. And the very next day, the tech company who wanted this same foreign national for full-time H-1B work filed their concurrent H-1B without winning the lottery, and that was approved. And we were beyond excited, and we refined our plan, and we partnered with UMass Boston, and this Massachusetts Global Entrepreneur in Residence program took off, was an extreme success. It still is. It still exists today at a slightly different level. But this was the country's first effort to have one university stand up and say, we will be that university to file a part-time H-1B so that a tech company can benefit and the U.S. economy will benefit. I do want to add that UMass Boston came up with a couple of rules, which at the time seemed reasonable. First, their rules were the technology company who would be filing the concurrent H-1B petition had to be venture backed because they wanted a really good story. Their second rule was the employee had to be employed in Massachusetts because UMass Boston wanted to create the message that they are helping keep tech companies in Massachusetts surviving and thriving by helping them capture these valuable foreign national talents. And that was a great rule at the time, too. But Danielle, as you know, what happened was after 3 or 4 years, I became a little bit disenchanted with the program because it was not scaling. UMass Boston had a limited number of part-time 5-hour-a-week jobs that they could offer. And moreover, they were not interested in helping companies that were not venture backed, which was so many companies that needed that help. And finally, they weren't willing to help anybody outside of Massachusetts. Well, there was that deflated so many people's hopes who needed this program. And so it was really right at that time that you and I began to brainstorm. Could we start our own Cap-Exempt H-1B organization? And after maybe a year of back and forth, Danielle, we started Open Avenues Foundation, which is a nonprofit affiliated with universities and has now been approved by USCIS over 300 times as a true and valid H-1B cap exempt organization. And Open Avenues now will hire foreign nationals for 5 hours a week and will put them to work doing very interesting work, which you can talk about, Danielle. But the point is, once Open Avenue Foundation's Cap Exempt H-1B is approved, life science companies, pharmaceuticals, businesses of all sorts, financial institutions, they can then immediately file their own cap-exempt H-1B petition without winning the lottery as long as the foreign national remains concurrently employed with Open Avenues Foundation, because that's a critical part of the cap-exempt concurrent H-1B program. The foreign national still has not won the lottery, so they can't jump full-time to a for-profit company that's not a cap-exempt organization. They can't leave the cap-exempt organization, in this case, Open Avenues Foundation. They must remain employed at least part-time. And then everything's worked smoothly. We keep getting approvals of our cap-exempt H-1 petitions, and all of the concurrent employers all across the country are getting approved for their concurrent H-1B petition. And the foreign nationals here working for both companies in valid H-1B status.
When we developed this program, you and I talked a lot about what compliance looked like, right? How does someone know that this is a legitimate program? How do we convince USCIS that individuals are actually working for 5 hours a week for a cap exempt organization and that this isn't just a loophole in immigration law? And I was on a call with Boundless the other day, and they asked me this question: how is it that this program is legit? You know, if we're going to advise our clients, and so same with attorneys across the country, they say to us, if we're going to advise our clients to do this program, to take this pathway, we need to know that this is something that is not qualified as a loophole. And I stood behind your story and I said that we had developed this, you know, it's been 7 years and we have a 99% success rate, and we've really crossed T's and dotted I's with compliance in the filing process. And I said that you had started the Global Entrepreneur in Residence program. And I said that USCIS was even part of those conversations with you and the Massachusetts governor at the time and Jeff Busking. But none of that really resonated. What really resonated was when I explained the education program and the aspects of the work that our fellows in our Build Fellowship program do for 5 hours per week. Because it's not just a sign on the dotted line for a visa. When someone joins our fellowship program and wants this cap exempt H-1B solution, foreign nationals have to spend 5 hours a week creating projects within their field, launching those projects with our 15 college and university partners to train students and build that future pipeline. And the projects are niche and they're interesting, and students really love working on them. And that is what our fellows spend that time doing. And that's what we petition for. This is not a fake petition. USCIS would see right through that. And over the years, your firm has put together high quality petitions because the program is high quality. And that's part of what really resonates time after time with the immigration attorneys that I personally talk to, and companies. And I'm sure you have those kinds of conversations where you explain the same thing, which is why this works.
And Danielle, Open Avenues Foundation does an excellent job of documenting the 5 hours of work for every foreign national. They have not just a plethora of emails, but they have projects, documented projects that have been scoped. They have documents that students have signed up and actually attended the the program for 5 hours a week. They have documents of the student reviews of the foreign national who's leading these experiential learning projects in real time. The comments are coming in and the reviews are coming in. And all of this has been hugely helpful and successful in convincing the Immigration Service this is legit. This is not fraud. This is not fake. There's real specialty occupation work taking place for the full 5 hours a week.
Yeah. When do you advise clients typically to look at a cap exempt H-1B? Who's the right kind of client that you're sending to Open Avenues and the Build Fellowship program?
Well, the biggest group of clients who want these cap exempt H-1Bs and need them are employers who have a valuable foreign national, most likely in their last year of OPT or STEM OPT, who has lost the lottery every single year. And there are no more lotteries. And their OPT is going to expire in the coming summer when most OPTs expire. And the foreign national is going to be out. They don't qualify for O1. They're not that extraordinary. There's not a decent alternative. And but the cap exempt H-1B is a solid alternative for people in these situations. And so they're the most likely place where I am advising employers and foreign national employees that they should be considering a cap exempt H-1B. Most of the time, we're all in agreement, both the employer, the foreign national, and myself. We're in agreement. Let's wait to see what happens with the March lottery. But every year, I have several clients who don't want to wait. They just can't risk it. They would rather be starting the cap exempt H-1B ahead of time. Some of them started the fall before, and the H-1B is approved long before the lottery. Of course, they are still entering the lottery. That's essential. And Danielle, if I didn't make that clear before, even if you successfully get an approved cap exempt H-1B, the employer must continue to keep registering the foreign national into the H-1B lottery because that is the fastest and most likely way to stop needing the cap exempt H-1B.
Yeah. We have about a year and a half average in our program, meaning that's how long individuals are typically in the cap exempt H-1B status before they, yes, win that next lottery, or they finally qualify for an O-1, or many of them have green cards pending as well. And they are waiting for that work authorization EAD card to come through. So those are reasons why people would exit our program. But yes, they stay in our program for as long as needed.
I have a call this morning, just this morning, from a very good client in California in the Silicon Valley who has a lot of H-1Bs, and he found the perfect candidate. Um, she's in Singapore, but he has to have her. And we're entering her in the H-1B lottery. And he just emailed this morning. He said, I need open avenues to start the Cap-Exempt H-1B process. I understand the lottery is only, it ends in a few days, and we'll know the results shortly. I can't wait. So whatever they charge to start talking to me, I'm ready to pay it. Please introduce me. So I am about to introduce him to Open Avenues Foundation. By the way, Danielle, where on the website is the information of how to start that process? I believe there's a link to a questionnaire, which is really the kickoff of the process.
Yeah, you can go to openavenusfoundation.org or thebuildfellowship.com. And both of those websites have a form to enter your information or an employee's information and start the process for inquiring about the fellowship. And we have a lot of companies right now that are actually doing an evaluation process to make sure that the employee is qualified for the fellowship prior to the lottery. So we even see some companies like the one you're talking about put a deposit down for the lottery so that they can start the process now and do almost all of the work ahead of time so that it's a very quick turnaround, especially folks who have expirations in April or May. They really do want to start the process earlier, especially Jeff. We haven't talked about this yet, but we saw so far this year a huge increase in the number of requests for evidence in the petitions that we're filing for H-1B. We still have maintained our 99% approval rate, but we have seen a slowdown via requests for evidence, which makes more work for your law firm, a slower process to approval. And that's going to be a big theme, I think, in the next year and definitely around lottery season. So, what should companies be thinking about when it comes to requests for evidence and timeline effects?
Okay, well, first of all, sometimes you just can't do anything to stop a request for evidence coming. We do believe under the Trump administration, there's going to be a massive number of requests for evidence. It happened last time he was president, and we see it already starting, even just since February 1st. It's unbelievable, the increase in requests for evidence. Oftentimes, they are asking for documentation that is already right in front of them. But sometimes they're questioning everything, most often specialty occupation. Um, so what can you do? Well, you can have your attorney do an extra thorough job to prove the specialty occupation exists, to prove that the job truly requires a specialized degree and that the foreign national has that specialized degree. The immigration regulations have a very thorough analysis of what must be done. It's extremely time consuming. I think most law firms don't do it unless they get an RFE asking for it,
Interesting.
because it is extremely time consuming. Part one of the analysis is to go through every other employee at the company who's in that same or similar job and prove they have that specialized degree. Part two is to go to Indeed and Monster and prove that the field regularly requires that specialized degree for this job. And the problem is the Immigration Service insists that the companies you're picking from Indeed and Monster that require the specialized bachelor's degree must be of the same scope and size as your company. Well, that That's difficult. That's very time consuming. Um, Sometimes you don't know from looking at the ad on Monster or Indeed what is that company's scope and size, and very time consuming, which is why I think most law firms don't even do this unless they get an RFE. We are doing it right from the beginning, and we think that's helped us limit the number of RFEs regarding specialty occupation. But we still get them, and every lawyer is going to be getting a lot.
Yeah, I think the normalization of these RFEs has to be part of the process of what ahead of time when we talk to companies
Yeah,
about what to expect, we have to
right.
talk about this increased timeline. And so
Yeah, we have to, it's managing expectations, and it's essential.
it is essential. So we have time for one of our viewer submitted questions today. This one is coming from someone named Milad, and he said, Danielle and Jeff, I am getting nervous about all of these ICE checkpoints and talk about deportation. Is there any way that this affects foreign nationals here on temporary work visas? I'm in H-1B status. So, Jeff, wanted to pick your brain on what you're hearing and what you're advising and what you think about the potential implications for folks on in these temporary work visa statuses, green cards, etc.
Yeah. Um, Danielle, just a few weeks ago, one of my friends was driving past Hanscom Field in Massachusetts, which is a small airport but has many government agencies have offices there, many tech companies have offices there, and right in front of the gate where everybody enters and everyone exits were two ICE trucks, big letters ICE, and they had a roadblock in both directions and making every car stop. The traffic was backed up for miles and they were checking everybody. Um, my friend has an H-1B, and he said he stopped, and the officer said, "I want to see your ID and understand and your passport or whatever you have." And he had a foreign last name, and the officer asked if he's a foreigner, and he said he was, and told him he's an H-1B. The officer asked for proof. He didn't have much proof, but he had his name and the name of his employer, and the officer went back to one of the trucks. And a good 7, 8 minutes later, came back and said, "I see it. You're approved for H-1B. You're good to go," and let him go. But wow, that was shocking. That um, just on this side road in Massachusetts,
Did he
this was
call you
checking.
during those 8 minutes that he was in the
No,
car?
no, he got no. He told me the next day, and he wasn't that nervous. So here's a takeaway. In this day and age, it's really not a bad idea to just keep a copy of your immigration approval notice in your wallet. So if anyone's asking, you have it, it shows you've been approved, you're still valid today, and that's going to solve almost every problem. But I'll tell you another thing that we're telling everybody from documented H-1B, L-1, and O-1 workers to undocumented people. You don't need to talk to ICE. You don't need to talk to the police. You don't need to roll down your car window, and you don't need to open the door to your home. You can say, "I hear you. I'd like to see a warrant that authorizes you to specifically ask me to roll down my window, or a warrant saying you have the right to come into my home. I'd like to see a warrant that authorizes you to ask me these questions." And without that, my lawyer told me I shouldn't talk to you. And every time I've had undocumented people report to me and documented people, every time the response from either the ICE officer or the police officer has been, "Okay, you can go." Or they were one of my undocumented clients, they were knocking on her door and she shouted through the door, "I am not opening the door without a warrant. My lawyer said I don't have to." And the police officer said, "Have a nice day," and left and never came back. So I think the ICE and police have been trained that if people say they're not going to talk, they don't have to talk. And that's how it works. So word of advice to everybody, um, you don't want to be rude, but you don't have to volunteer anything.
That is huge for folks who obviously feel like they have no control over their future right now. And that is a really important, just, one line to memorize for individuals.
Mhm.
A lot of them, I'm sure a lot of your undocumented clients who are calling you and calling your firm are desperate for any type of solution right now to not get potentially taken in the middle of the day or night in wherever public setting that they're in, right? That's what we're hearing. And for so many folks who are listening to this, they have documents and they are unsure what to carry with them and what is needed in those moments. So I think it's really interesting for folks who have documents to understand that they can show the documents, but they can also say this one line and potentially keep moving forward. So
I just have to put one caveat into what I just said.
yeah,
Of course, if you just ran a red light and the police come up and they witnessed you violating the law, then they do have the right to demand that you speak to them and show them your license and show them your registration. You can't say, I need a warrant, because that's an exception to the rule for warrants, is if the police officer has just witnessed a crime or a violation in progress.
yeah. So rule of thumb for everyone: slow down before you get to when you're at a yellow light. This is not the time to be going through those red lights. You don't know who's behind you. You will be asked for documentation. Let's avoid it at all costs. I'm sure your law firm is on speed dial these days. I know we're on speed dial for all of the fellows in our program as they think about the potential of increased compliance and site visits and USCIS coming to their homes to ask them about their remote work. But having copies of everything, having knowledge of your rights, all of this is so important right now. So I'm glad we're talking about it here. And I know you have a lot on your plate right now. It's a really busy season. We are doing a lot of advocacy right now about what options are for folks after the lottery. So for anyone listening who wants to learn more about H-1Bs, call Jeff's firm, get some information on what your opportunity is for H-1B. And if you are looking for that solution after the H-1B lottery and you're interested in the Build Fellowship Program and Open Avenues Foundation, please give me a ring. You can find me on LinkedIn and message me, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining our office hours today. We will be back next week with some more topics. Thanks, everyone.